Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast, Closing the Critical Skills Gap for Modern and Effective Security Operations Center Survey Results, sponsored by Awake, Anomaly, Cisco, ExtraHop, Logarithm, Reversing Labs, Samplify, Swimlane, and Threat Connect. My name is Jessica Gallus of SANS, and today's featured speakers are Barbara Filkins, SANS Analyst Program Research Director, and John Pescatore, Director of Emerging Security Trends, who will be moderating today's webcast. If during the webcast you have any questions for our presenters, please enter them into the questions window located on the GoToWebinar interface at any time. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to John.
Okay, thanks, Jessica, and welcome everyone. I'm John Pescatore. Welcome to the webcast on this survey Barbara and I did. It's a popular topic, you can tell by the long list of sponsors, but also by the very long title. Took us a lot of words to get across what we were trying to do in this survey. So let me give you an idea of what we want to do. I usually try to start by breaking the ice and looking back in history on something interesting that occurred on this date in history. And not a heck of a lot interesting happens in the dog days of summer. Remember in the old days when this was vacation time? The only things I could find was about now, a year or so ago, Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Twitter, had his account hacked. And you would have hoped that it would have caused him to focus on increasing the security of Twitter, but no, they had very important individual accounts hacked here recently. And to skew old on you, back in 1981, apparently that's when Lady Di and Princess Charles got married, back when that was an exciting event in the summer. So not a heck of a lot of exciting things, but this is also that period of time where quite often we're integrating the new hires into our organization and trying to get them as productive as fast as possible. And that's sort of what we focused this survey on. So to give you an idea of what we're going to go through, Barb and I will sort of split things up and talk to each about different sections. But as we go along, there'll be opportunity to answer your questions as we go along. We'll save plenty of time at the end as well. But if you have a question while I'm speaking or Barbara's speaking, enter them into that little window on the toolbar on the right-hand side, and I'll be watching, and we can try to get to as many as possible real time. If you are watching a recorded version of this webinar, at the end I'll give you an email address you can send your questions to, and we'll get you the right answer from the right person. I mentioned, and Jessica went through the list of sponsors here. We're also going to give some of the sponsors an opportunity to sort of weigh in on what they've seen from their customers on the skills gaps and hiring needs and hiring methods and the like. And you see the information up, same bat time, same bat channel here tomorrow, if you're interested in hearing from some additional experts in the field. So with that, let's get started. So I joined SANS back in 2013 after almost 14 years as the lead security analyst at Gartner, and spent my whole career in security and seen a lot of surveys, done a lot of surveys. And to skew old again, I'm quoting Albert Einstein here, that I think is a good quote, that, you know, the questions are the important part, that any survey can get any results it wants by focusing on the questions. What we're trying to do here is not boil the ocean, not ask 1,000 questions about hiring and come back with the numbers. You're seeing constantly that millions of jobs are available in security, but to really ask hiring managers, what were their critical gaps? What were the most effective ways they found in filling those critical gaps? And what were some of the success stories and key things they could pass on to the audience here? The whole goal at SANS is always to have these webinars deliver data that you can use to take action to do better at your job and help your company do better at security. We want to avoid the kind of USA Today type surveys that end up in data that's not telling you anything you really need to know. And whoops, we're having a slow internet day, so that's the example of the types of things we're trying to avoid. So you'll get the greatest on that. So again, the goal is to highlight the actionable parts of the survey. You'll all be getting URLs for the full details out of the survey and can read the full results as you get time. So the goal there is to figure out ways to help enterprises increase both the effectiveness and the efficiency of security operations. So on the right-hand side, you see these 6 patterns. This comes from another paper that I did a number of years ago at SANS that was looking at how security operations centers can move up in a sort of like a SOC maturity model concept, but move up to these patterns, the higher level patterns, which are both more efficient and more effective. Typically in any maturity model, at the bottom you're chaotic, at the top you're adaptive, in between you're making steps between the two. And usually what happens is you get more effective the more mature you get at doing anything. You're better at it. You're not necessarily more efficient because you're investing in formalizing things and doing them in repeatable ways. And once you start reaching, in this case, the pretty good SOC at pattern 5 up there, you're starting to do things in a repeatable way. You're starting to use force multipliers for tools and starting to be able to move up from everybody's working as hard as they can, like Luthi and Ethel on the chocolate factory production line there, to where most of the arrows are coming pretty close to the target, starting to make it where we're going to home in on the bullseye and the important part of enabling business while keep letting the good guys in while keeping the bad guys out. And nobody or very few people ever reach the unicorns powered by rainbows type thing at the top level of any of these maturity levels. But the idea there is to not only be effective and efficient at what you're doing now, but to be able to do it more continuously and to be able to adapt more quickly. As we all know, one of the reasons cybersecurity is a fun area to work in is everything changes constantly. It's not just the technology changes, the way the business wants to use the technology changes. The bad guys think of new vulnerabilities and new attacks. And by the time we've got a handle on that, the technology changes and the business changes again. So the key is adaptability and the ability to do things in repeatable manners, but also be updating everything in repeatable manners. And that's got to carry into a number of areas, but we got to keep the main goal in mind. The main goal is we have to be using the company's resources to be making a difference to the company's bottom line. And sort of the way I translate that is into the standard attack model kind of kill chain scenario that we basically want to move things to the left. We want to reduce the amount of incident response we're doing and clean up after damage, and move things to more early action and as much as possible damage prevention. These recent ransomware attacks, I do a lot of bicycling. Garmin just got hacked, and looks like they may have had to pay off a ransom event. So you can see the costs they're going to incur because of the late action. Whereas if they'd have done some early things to realize they were vulnerable to certain attacks, or they didn't have backups, or whatever the case was, to be able to react very quickly right when the threat was delivered and perhaps avoid all that big loss, right there, you're able to show the company that its investments in the security people, the security processes, and technology to implement those controls is paying off to the company's bottom line. Now, any survey ever done, we actually didn't include these questions in this survey, but any survey ever done where you ask what are the major obstacles to anything, not just cybersecurity. If you ask business managers this, or CIOs this, or the head of procurement this, the obstacle is always the company doesn't give me enough resources and the company doesn't understand my problem enough. So it's key in cybersecurity, like everywhere else, to find these force multipliers where we can say, yeah, we know we're not going to get the number of people we need or the full budget we need, or where do we find ways to, with the staff we do have, if nothing else, prioritize what everybody looks at first. So the most likely threats that are most likely to cause damage show up first, and that we're using tools to help people react more quickly and eliminate some of the redundant things and the parts people hate, or put in tools in place so that the real skilled unicorn type analysts don't have to do the mundane things, yet they can pass off prioritize work queues to the lower level staff and so on. So I always like pointing to stuff from the SANS SOC research side of things. Chris Crowley, especially in the holy triad of people, process, and technology, is all about efficiency and effectiveness in all 3 of those areas. We're going to focus a lot on the sort of people side here and the technology side a bit, but obviously it really does start with processes, being able to put in place documented, repeatable processes that can survive when headcounts change or when there are gaps in headcounts and so on. So that's what we focused on. There's been a lot of things out there that have sort of bugged me over the years, as far as 15 years ago when I was at Gardner, when we first started hearing this. There's millions of unfilled positions in cybersecurity, and the numbers just don't add up. If you added to everybody's budget, if you doubled the security staff to everybody's budget, loads of companies would start losing money. So this issue, as we at Gartner and certainly for the past 8 years at SANS, as we talk to SOC managers and CISOs, isn't really about just filling headcount. It's really that there's gaps or there's gaps in skills or in capabilities that I need to fill. And there's been this myth that if I train my people, they'll just leave and get a higher paying job because there's a million unpaid jobs out there. So we wanted to look into turnover and attrition as well. And Barbara will go through some interesting data there. And then from a hiring perspective, sort of knew the answer to this one and it was validated in what came back, but what's the best source for productive new hires? Another area that's come up in several surveys, even when we didn't ask the questions directly, but when we did qualitative interviews with the hiring managers, was what are some of the things you wish a new hire could do, an entry-level hire could do on day one that typically you see they're not able to do? And then an interesting thing happened here that Barbara will go through. Just coincidentally, this survey started out pretty much right when the pandemic was declared. So most of the respondents had lots of uncertainty, and Barbara will go through that. So this, I call it the new reality. We're now, what are we, 4 months into this first phase of the new reality. It will change things about hiring. It will change things about how teams have to work together. It will change things about some of the skills they need in order to collaborate and influence and drive change. We'll touch on that towards the end. So let's get going. So let me turn things over to Barb, and she'll go through the demographics and some of the key things around the data we gathered.
Okay, well, thanks, John. This is our typical demographic snapshot that we started to put in our survey papers because everybody always wants to know about the demographics, but they don't want to know about the demographics. But somehow when you do a survey, you have to say who your respondent audience was. And in a lot of ways, this is similar to what we normally get with SANS with some twists. We did see our top 4 being technology, banking and finance, government, and cybersecurity. What's interesting is technology and cybersecurity are really more of, I would say, technology providers, service providers, that kind of category. Banking and finance is a major vertical, and of course, government. We also had an orientation more towards the small end, which might also be influenced by the fact that we were looking at the technology and cybersecurity. Maybe I'm wrong on this, but a lot of security technology firms tend to be lightweight. They have smaller employee populations, and maybe in the pandemic world, they're a little bit more agile than either government or banking. We also had, normally we do have security administrators and analysts, non-management roles as our majority, and that was the case here. But when you take a look at the security manager and director, the security architect, which is kind of one of those hybrid management technical roles, and IT manager or director, we really had more of an influence, I think, in this survey on the management viewpoint than we normally do. And the other thing also in terms of operations and headquarters, we were very much US centric, but we also got pretty good response from the international scene as well. Next slide. Okay. So really quickly, what are the demographic takeaways? Well, the first thing, and that picture down in the corner was the number who accessed a week, and then the number who said, you know, yeah, I'm qualified, we'll go on. The survey ran from the beginning of March through the end of May. The WHO declared the pandemic on the 11th of March. So really, the timing for the survey was totally in the path of the pandemic. And it put the industries that we looked, that are the leading industries, in the shadow of the unknown. Government probably may have suffered the worst, but it influenced banking and finance, education, and cybersecurity as well. And then the geographic distribution, as I said, was more uniform than normal. Normally, we're very US-centric, and indeed, we were US-centric for this survey, but we had more of a response from the overseas and the international population than we normally do. So, next slide. That one came up quick. So what does this mean for hiring plans? Well, what was very interesting is that uncertainty of the unknown as opposed to the certainty of the known. the pandemic required, or basically created, two scenarios. The first one was there was a very rapid transition to an almost 100% work from home environment. We had another survey around this time, a questionnaire in terms of remote workers, and the transition, the shift was quite amazing, including the security team. So that rapid transition was, I think, very unique, but it was overshadowed by an economic uncertainty which still exists today, though things have kind of stabilized to a certain extent. And what was really interesting here was that the vertical with the highest uncertainty in hiring staff was government, with 52% of those respondents expressing concern over the fact that they were not sure of where they would be going forward. And then we had, basically 34 versus 25% that said they were going to add it. John, do you want to add anything on this uncertainty?
Yeah, a couple things on that government thing. Certainly in the U.S., I can't say I'm as positive about this outside the U.S., but in the U.S., government had the most trouble moving the work from home, because in the U.S. federal government, certainly there'd been resistance to supporting work from home, and we've certainly seen that in many states as well. So the uncertainty, a lot of that has to do with, can they even be functional without working from home? And if they have to go back to offices early in the midst of the pandemic, are they really going to hire people, and so on? The other thing we saw, this really has nothing to do with the headcount thing, but it's something important for everybody to keep in mind. IT had to scramble to deal with performance of everything in work from home. We had a very early work from home seminar or a webinar that myself and Randy Marchani spoke at as the CISO of Virginia Tech. And we think about the security aspect, and the security team's distributed, and how do we do our job? Well, the IT team had to scramble just to make sure people could connect. They didn't have the capacity in VPNs. They didn't have all the applications that were able to handle it, and so on. One side effect of that seems to be a dramatic drop in their performance in patching, especially on server side things, where the IT team is distributed as well. They're not necessarily all sitting in the building where the data center is, and now they have things out in the cloud, and they're not even near the physical data center. So things even like Exchange patches that typically you might see 70% patched within a month of the Exchange patches. 3 months later, these critical patches from March, 80% were unpatched. So there's this whole work from home thing here is a security impact, both to the productivity of the security team, but also a very negative. It's sort of like forced the IT operations side to focus. Well, performance is job one for a while. Okay, we got to get back to performance and reliability, and security is job one again. And so that's something that's starting to rear its ugly head.
Yeah, I think one kind of amusing sideline, though, is with the work from home, a lot of people have become their own security experts. So I get amused by people that say, your internet connection isn't working as well. And I'm thinking to myself, my internet connection's fine. I think it's downstream in terms of the server, but that's okay. We'll deal with it. I think I'm handing it over to you next, John, on the external services.
Yeah, so one of the questions we asked was about the plan. This is a standard one we've asked in lots of these. What's your current use of external service providers, outsourcing or managed service providers, and what are your plans? So if you kind of do the math, if you look at the one on the left-hand side there, bar chart, about 18.5% were unknown, didn't know what their use of it was. So if you take them out and you add up the rest of the numbers, then about 65%, or almost 2/3 of them, were using some amount of external service providers, and about 26% of them plan to increase that. And that's a little higher than you typically see. Quite often, I mean, the 2/3 using some form is pretty typical, but 26% saying increase, and only, I think it was 7% saying they plan on decreasing when you had the bottom two. Quite often what you see is we're making investments, whether it's in SIM or in SOAR tools or other things, where we hope we'll be able to convince management that we need to build up the SOC staff and have less reliance on external third parties. But again, the uncertainty here is, well, I may not be able to hire, so I better fight for external service budget to make sure I can still cover things. When we ask what particular roles, you see that on the right-hand side. Now, there's a standard thing that generally outsourcing of threat-facing skills or attack techniques and threat-facing skills, external threat-facing skills, is usually always at the top to outsource. For one, that's where the deep expertise is. The other is that it's less business specific. If I'm in pharmaceuticals, somebody telling me how to run my firewalls or monitoring my firewalls or pen testing me, that I might do only 4 times a year or 6 times a year, outsourcing's okay. You look down at the bottom with the small play, architects and compliance and data protection, things that are very closely tied to the way we do business are less likely to be outsourced. So to sort of summarize what we saw on the outsourcing side of things, those deep, narrow skills, we all want to hire T-shaped analysts is the term, although I found another one, pie-shaped, where if you're good at 2 things, you're a pie-shaped analyst. But the T-shaped analyst that's deep in one area but has broad skills as well, that's what we all want to hire. Those deep, narrow skills like pen testing or digital forensics or other specialties or what have increased the amount of outsourcing interest, and those internal facing skills like architectures or data protection and like the least, and security operations somewhat in between. What we saw was that distribution did not change. That it wasn't all of a sudden, well, we're gonna rely more on internal pen testers and the like, but the overall numbers in each category kind of went up. So there is this issue of if I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to hire anybody, I better think more about outsourcing. So let me see, we got a question here. Please define job would go under threat intelligence compared to threat research and hunting. There is some overlap there, but the intent was threat intelligence are the types of services and data collection, could be open source, could be collating vendor information, or it could be proprietary, looking into dark web and honeypots and other ways of gathering sort of unique threat information. That's typically a threat intelligence server. And for example, a couple of the sponsors of this are in the threat intelligence business. Threat research and hunting is more the internal side, that it would be people skills who are going to be having the threat information in mind, going across the system, looking into endpoints, pulling in information, saying, wait a minute, I think we have a compromise already that hasn't been detected, the typical hunting type skills. So the differentiation is threat intelligence or threat research and hunting is more of that person job with some skills. Threat intelligence is more of a data as a service feed almost. So let's say, I think we go back to you next here, Barb. Yeah.
I think you're right. So one of the things that was very interesting, we looked at attrition in the sense people leaving, and we found that hiring is offsetting attrition, the government being the exception, which might also be a function of the pandemic. But what was also interesting, this was actually from a survey that John and I did earlier this year, is that I maintain that you also need to look at what happens, because people that are hired, this goes back to the fact, they get promoted, they get better at their jobs, they move up the food chain, not necessarily management, but into a position of more responsibility, or going back to that T-shape analysis, they have broad skills at the top, but they have a very deep understanding of a specific capability that they're being leveraged. And so the gains are negative, but not necessarily in a bad way, because it means that the hiring needs to keep up at the bottom with the people that are getting more capabilities and are being promoted up through the company. That's not normally a factor that is considered when you start looking at the hiring and firing stats, but it's something that I think speaks to a stability in the industry. The other thing is, when we looked at it by size, small companies are seeing the highest turnover. That may also have to do with the fact that we have tech and cybersecurity, and the talent pools there are fairly mobile. But the overall turnover was below industry average. And before I go on to that visual, John, do you want to say anything to this?
Yeah, I think that's an important thing for everybody to keep in mind, and we'll go down as Barb goes through her takeaways, and I have some later on, some additional thoughts there. But I started out my career in cybersecurity right out of college, going to work for the government at NSA and then the Secret Service after that. And as a government employee, we used to always complain, hey, private industry makes a lot more money than we do. And the bosses would always say, yeah, but the attrition, the turnover in the government's much lower, so you must love it here. And there's some truth there that people don't just leave jobs for money. But if the turnover is low, there's reasons and there's opportunities to get higher salaries out there, which we know there are. There's reasons why, and we wanted to uncover some of those reasons why is turnover low. And certainly in the government, you can see in this case in cybersecurity, turnover is quite higher because the government salaries are not just lower than average, they're much lower in cybersecurity. So there is a lot of government brain drain as people move from government to private industry. But when attrition rates are not high, but people are claiming there's lots of unfilled jobs and everybody will make money, then you know there's a mismatch between what everybody's saying and what the reality is. And we'll touch on that as we go along.
Okay, so just taking a look at this graphically on the next slide. Oops. What we have on the top is those red arrows, you know, average annual turnover, low is 10%, high is 15%, technology is towards the higher end, about 13.5%. And so when we looked at some of the numbers that we had gotten, we find that the attrition at the cybersecurity is for the most part below that 10%. So it's not in the common rate. So it's not as much of a, I don't know if you want to call it a driver or a problem, as it might be seen. So turnover in that sense is not as high. The cybersecurity firm by industry and small firms were in those higher ends, and of course government trumped it at the 14%. But again, in most segments, it's well below average. So going on to the takeaways. Actually, we take this as good news. Back to that comment that John made about, you know, if we train them, they'll leave. Well, longevity of staff is normally a leading indicator of a strong cybersecurity program, or it should be. And teamwork trumps technology when it comes to working across the business to avoid vulnerabilities and quickly react to threats and develop new techniques and processes and implementing new technology, because very often the company will buy the technology and then not give the staff enough time to really explore all the power that that technology provides. The thing here is that this doesn't necessarily obviate the need for using outside services like pen testing. It kind of turns it around a little bit. So for an enterprise, you want your teamwork to be people that really understand the enterprise and the technology that the enterprise is using and be current and capable with that. The flip side of it is when you come to something like pen testing or let's say incident response in a very narrow world, you look for those firms that have developed their teams with an emphasis on the excellence in pen testing and knowing how to pen test. And those people can stay fresh in that skill set as opposed to bringing them into the company and then they kind of get dulled down because you don't do pen testing all the time. The other thing is that I think our results also say that there should be a goal of minimizing security team turnover in whatever way is best, you can best handle it. And constantly increasing salaries isn't usually the most effective approach. And I don't want to bash government, but the thought was going through my head when John was talking about government. Sometimes it's not just the salary, it's the quality of life. So if you're working in a highly regulated environment with little ability to be creative, I'll use it for the want of a better word, in using your talents in the security world, there's plenty of places where you can go out and have your talents effectively utilized. And so that might be another reason why people might be leaving a more regulated or structured environment. And the thoughts would be is, you know, try providing that well-defined career path to avoid alert burnout, be able to demonstrate advancement, again, not just in money and management, but also allowing these talented people to be more creative, if you will. Provide sufficient funding for training and skills enhancement, it's going to be a perk that might keep them with your enterprise as opposed to have them train and then leave. And many years ago, I got beat up for using the word play. But, you know, the opportunities to play with and develop new security tools and techniques, and it's not just developing new tools, but being able to use the tools you have in new ways. So I think as much as possible, a creative environment around your security and possibly your IT teams can keep your enterprise, keep the skill and the staff, keep the skilled staff in your enterprise. But then the question of hiring. Next slide.
Okay.
I'm going to let you have your 2 cents worth in a minute, John.
Sure.
But I just wanted to say it's what we found here. It really is who you know that matters. By far, the leading and most successful sources for potential new hires came from within the organizations. And this is another reason why you want to try to keep your team in place if possible. Existing employees in the IT organization and referrals for new staff. So if your employee and consultant base is happy with you as an organization, you're going to get better referral and probably better potential hires and actual hires than otherwise. And the trends appear universal here. They're connected to neither industry nor organizational size. So the bottom takeaway is satisfied good employees are the leading source for more employees. Now, there is one little thing we wanted to make a comment on, and I think John will add to it. Existing employees in our IT organization, it's kind of like you're stealing from Peter to pay Paul in some ways. We're not trying to say that the IT staff should be moved to security, but it's something to be aware of. And I'll let you make a comment on that, John, because I know that you were very interested in that one.
Yeah, this is one of the, if we put our security blinders on, there's lots of things we could do to make security better that may make the overall company worse. Not going to make a friend of the CIO, who may be the CISO's boss, if we're always stealing from IT operations to feed security operations. But if that's part of a recognized strategy that says it's probably easier to hire new Cisco certified network technicians into IT than it is to be hire in skilled cybersecurity analysts that can go to work and do cybersecurity from day one. So if it's part of a planned thing, we know this is going to be the best source for security people, so let's work on the pipeline for junior IT people coming into IT and desktop and user operations and the like is a successful strategy out there. Second thing is this idea, it's pretty common sense that the longer a team stays together, the more productive the team will be. That maturity model I put up, ideally we have processes and playbooks and automation and all kinds of things that the machine keeps humming even as the people change. Well, we all know that's not true. Very few of us are going to be at the rainbow unicorn level where that type of stuff works, if anybody's ever really there. So again, longevity of a team. I could tell this at Gartner from year to year. I'd be dealing with the same companies on the phone. They'd spend about the same amount on security, yet the ones that had the same people talking to me each year were never in the news for breaches. The other ones were, oh yeah, we're dealing with another breach. What do you think about this? Second thing is, let me get to a question here, and Barb, I'll get your opinion on this too. Question says, whoops, a new one came in and pushed the old one. Question says, is this truly focused on SOC, basically? Because we have some roles in there like auditor that really don't fall under the purview of SOC. So in the title, we certainly did put SOC in there, and we tend to focus most of our attention in it. But when we were asking about the skills and the gaps, we did include way more than what might fit into the standard definition of a SOC. Certainly auditors are rarely in the SOC. But in general, most of the gaps and the skills and the areas fell out of the roles that are in the security operations side. For example, a security architect is often not part of the SOC either. But so most of these numbers were not broken. I don't think we broke them down by roles, did we, Barb?
We broke them down by respondent roles. I don't think we broke it down by roles. I'm taking a quick look through the survey. I don't think we talked about the roles. We didn't flip it the other way and ask a role in that sense. But the thing I would say, well, then that's hiring authority. But I would say that our results were weighted mostly from the analysts, the admins, and then, as I said, that distribution of management. So it was a perspective. So I think that I would almost say that this perspective of the turnover aspect is SOC. We can say it's strongly SOC because of the skill space, but I think it also may be more representative of what we're getting in the industry from a security community, because the respondents to the survey, if I remember, the number of, let's say, auditors and compliance people were fairly low.
Okay, another question came in, said our findings are similar or echo the recommendations of the Aspen Cybersecurity Group, which I haven't seen the report. I have to look into it. Do you know if any of the respondents align with that? I don't know the answer to that. That's something we'll look into and get you. Another question was, where can you find that paper I mentioned with the SOC patterns 1 through 6? It's a couple years old now. It's in the SANS library reading room. If you do a Google on probably my name and SOC maturity model, it'll come up, and you'll be able to download it from the SANS library. One last thing, somebody said we answered the question about is the government attrition due to the salary discrepancies between government and private industries. Do want to echo what Barb said. That's, I think, a big part of it, but also in the government, we tend to see the cybersecurity groups have even less authority. So they often have responsibility and blame, but often even less authority than cybersecurity groups in private industry, and a lot more frustration on that side of things. There's also the Barb mentioned, and I'm going to emphasize this in a bit, the play aspect or creativity aspect, and getting the work with tools and create things and do more than just sort of stare at alerts all day. Quite often in the government, it's contractors, insourcers or outsourcers, or just defense contractors and the like, that get to do the cool part. And the government cybersecurity side are mostly doing the program management and the not so creative or fun side. I think that is also, that's why I left the government all those years ago, and I think we hear a lot about that still today. Okay, let's move on before we start running out of time here. So another question we asked, and I've also asked this in a number of different ways on SOC surveys, and a different survey Alan Paller, founder of SANS, and I did early a couple years ago. We asked hiring managers, what tools do you wish new hires knew how to use on day one? So not what topics could they talk about, but what actual products and tools could they use? And you see on them listed in order of frequency there, the top 12. And you see there's a lot of open source tools, Wireshark being at the top. There's commercial SIM products. Splunk happened to be the most commonly mentioned product, commercial product. And then you see lots of different areas. And when I did the qualitative interviews on the SOC surveys, what came back several times, a couple common themes came back was, first off, typically we have to have somebody sit with a new SOC analyst side saddle for a couple days and show them we use this tool, that tool, and this tool's integrated to that tool. And we're not really explaining to them what a threat is. They know cybersecurity, but these actual tools we're using, they did not use in college, or they did not use at their last job, or whatever. The second thing is that so that the hidden productivity meant a new hire is not only less productive than an experienced hire. I'm pulling experienced hires to sort of sit side saddle with the new ones coming on. Another interesting one was it didn't make the top 12, but this came across from a couple. Said we'd also wish they were fluent in the use of grown-up collaboration tools, by which they meant Outlook. We wish they used email and they weren't constantly thinking you collaborated through. They used Outlook and Teams, and they weren't frequently, no, we don't use Twitter for that. No, we don't use WhatsApp for that. That's not how we do things. So I thought that was a funny comment. But what the common thread came across was tools. And if you were to listen to a lot of the very large vendors out there who are saying, oh, everybody uses too many security products. Well, nobody wants to use dozens and dozens of security products out there and tools, but nobody says, yeah, there's one vendor that sells me every tool I want. As you can see by the mix of open source and commercial. So part of this gets to, my father was a mechanic, and he wasn't just going to Sears and buying a 72-piece toolkit to do his job. He was buying the best tools for the particular parts of the job he needed because he was really good at his job, and he enjoyed being really good at his job, and he was really proud of being good at his job. And good tools were part of him being good at his job. And I think that's true across security as well. Another thing that came across from the hiring managers was the ones that had the most use of particularly the open source tools, they tended to have, this is a small sample size, like a dozen respondents, tended to have the lowest rates of attrition. Like the comment was, yeah, we have, I have 10 people on our team. I've only had to replace one of them over the years, and that's because she got a better job when her husband got another job somewhere else. They moved, kind of thing. And they said, yeah, we by them building with these tools and playing with these tools and maintaining those tools, they get to be developers, not just responders, not just they're part of preventing bad things from happening, or creative ways to detect things quicker rather than just typing a lot all day long. So that creative and playing that Barb brought out, I think, is really key to longevity, to low attrition, which is just so key to productivity overall. Again, if you need to hire one additional person to handle the increased load, and you had 2 people leave, now you have to hire 3. And that's 10 times harder than just hiring one. So anyway, the sort of mix of tools and let people play, and having budgets or time where people can do that type of thing. And as Barb mentioned, the ability to move between different groups and play different roles and get exposed is sort of part of that both creativity and play aspect.
And actually, John, I have a comment on that one. Just your bullet on tool fluency, going back to your dad as a mechanic, it's knowing what tools fit, kind of fundamentally what tools fit and where they are best applied. And a lot of times fancy front ends are not necessarily the best thing to deal with that. Look at the fact that Python's on the list and PowerShell, they're both scripting languages. So.
Yeah, and if you look at like a lot of hype around AI and cybersecurity, you'll find that playing around with Python is a good way to understand how that works and what the strengths of it are and are not. So yeah, it's key. Okay, before we're starting to get close to our end time here, I just buried my question window. Let me see if I had any questions come in here. In your T-shaped analyst model, are you referring to just one tool like this list, or is that more of a skill domain that you're going deep in? Typically, it's more of a skill domain. Everybody uses different terms, but a SOC analyst on the cyber defense side is going to be fluent in firewalls, intrusion detection, probably even vulnerability scanning tools and the like, whereas somebody that's more focused on data protection will be in different tools, or on pen testing and different tools, or on forensics and incident response on different tools. So it's more of a T-shaped skills than a single, I'm the Splunk expert of the world, or I'm the Nessus expert of the world. What about machine learning skills? Question that came in. So this is a subject of a totally different set of things we're doing. I think I just did a vendor webinar where we touched on this, and Dave Holtzel of SANS and I have done some things together around this. It's too long a topic to get into here. I will say that machine learning, it's important to understand what it can and cannot do to differentiate in the hype that vendors put on what they're doing with machine learning. And it's also important in some of these tools, you can build your own little engines to do some very useful things, to take your own data lakes and drill down and do a lot of stuff. So that's a subject for a totally different webinar in the future. All right, with that, let's move on here a bit. So again, skewing old, another one of my high school classmates here, Thomas Edison. We'd like to focus on SANS, what you do, not what we talk about, what security people do and how it shows benefit to the business. And Edison was certainly a very energetic inventor who did lots of stuff, but he also realized you got to sell the stuff, right? It's one thing to invent a phonograph, it's another thing to convince people the value of the phonograph. So, again, everything we do has to be measured in how it helps the business or the mission in security. So if we're getting more effective and efficient, how does that connect to the business? And, it comes back to the well-known security processes we all know have to get done to do the job right. Starting in the upper left of knowledge of the business and the constraints the business operates under. OTT is my own little acronym. I always keep meaning to move it. That's over the transom dictates. That's where management says, no, we're going to turn left here. Don't ask why. Or in the government where OMB says, no, you have to do this. And everybody has to do that. But, starting from sort of knowledge of the business and what the constraints are the business are, and then we have all these different skills and roles and things around the circle that the shielding step is sort of where the rubber hits the road. So in this first sort of quadrant here of risk assessment and baselining and pen testing and hopefully everything's configured right, we know the excrement's going to hit the ventilator. We know things are going to go wrong. There's going to be vulnerabilities. There's going to be opening. What are we doing? How quickly are we reacting? And moving around the rest of this circle is all about, what we have to do. And again, I'm going to hype on the force multipliers again. And it is this mixture of people, process, and technology. Skills in the people multiply their forces. Technology that does a good job of fresh vulnerability data, fresh threat data, integrating that in with ways of mitigating and what techniques are out there and so on are really key to be able to do this. It's not just one or the other. It's not one out of the three, it's all of the three. So to sort of summarize on some action steps, and then we'll get to any remaining questions. If you do have any remaining questions, please enter them into the window there and we'll get to them. So we all hope the new reality is going to start soon, and I certainly hope whatever part of the world you're in, you're closer than we are right here, right now in the U.S. as far as some semblance of business coming back to normal. But we know it'll get there. We also know there'll be differences, just the way there's differences between the way we flew before September 11, 2001 and the way we flew afterwards. Geographies will be different. If you're a multinational company, we know there'll be geographic distance differences and same in verticals. So I think as you start thinking about filling those gaps, it's important to identify the real constraints, particularly this issue of distributed work and work at home. So the movement to cloud was happening pretty quickly before all this happened. And in this distributed environment, this movement to cloud and the movement to, I call them commercial cloud tools, Zoom's a good example, but lots of other ways of doing collaboration and storing things and sharing things is going to happen. So I think from a skills perspective, we'd seen a few years ago, CISOs and hiring managers definitely highlighting cloud skills in security. Not necessarily I need different people, I need my security staff to be able to understand how the cloud, understand how we have to extend visibility and the like into the cloud. I think that's going to bubble back up to the top because we'll be in this distributed manner for quite some time to come. The threats, we know what the threats will do. They focus on the bad news. We've already seen them focusing on COVID and medical constraints. We know there's more nation state activity aimed at the healthcare center and the like because of this. So I think the real constraints are I hate to use this trite term, but an opportunity to make some advances in security. Things like encryption, strong authentication, things that there's big barriers to having those happen. Those are skills we're going to need because we have this opportunity when the board of directors asks, okay, how do we not have the phishing attack succeed against our internal administrators like happened to Twitter? I've seen it. I do these board of directors briefings, and there's been this huge uptick of board of directors asking questions just like that. So I think there's some new skills this is going to cause the bubble up when we do this survey the next time. Go ahead, Barb.
I was going to say, John, there's another interesting thing too. Two other things I want to say as this move to a new reality. One is the concept, and I think we've already seen that starting. I think we're going to get some data from the metric survey that kind of talks about that that's coming up. But a different view of situational awareness, for the want of a better word. I think the community may already have it, but then that links into another part that you just touched on, and that is how to communicate that situational awareness in a kind of a non-physical world to people like the board of directors that are very used to effectively seeing things in black and white or brick and mortar, even though they may be, depending on the company, even though they may be dealing with a multinational company where they can't just put their fingers on everything. So cloud is a little bit abstracted. in a lot of ways, and being able to communicate that and make it concrete in a virtual world is another talent I think that needs to be folded in here.
Sure. So the gap assessment of your skills, it's easy to sort of go across the board and the NIST model or anything, and there's dozens of categories and things you can say, maybe we don't have that. There's a lot of movement using the MITRE ATT&CK model as another way of looking at where you have gaps in skills. I think that's a much more realistic way of doing it from a keep the bad guys outside of things. But I think another thing you have to look at is, okay, how do we have fewer incidents? And of the incidents we do have, how does each incident cause this company less damage? Maybe I really need to hire somebody really experienced in backup systems, because of we're not going to make much more of a dent in phishing. We better get much better at restore. Or maybe I better hire somebody that's really got a lot of experience, came out of software QA or software testing, because we're not going to make much more progress on reducing the vulnerabilities in the applications we're buying unless we can do that at the front end of the DevOps practice, or we can get things baked into the containers or baked into the pipeline type tools they're using. And I think that's, again, key to, if we get this opportunity to make some big changes because of the new reality coming along. And then what metrics, as Barb mentioned, the metric survey coming along, what things are we going to do that increase efficiency, that say, not only are we able to do things faster, but we're using fewer resources per incident. If we look at the time spent, there's an old metric I used to use in my system engineering days. How did you know when the software was ready to be released? Because software always had these phony baloney ways of doing things. We used to look at the number of hours of testing time found to find the next bug. So if we're really improving in security, it's going to be fewer hours, fewer analyst time to close a trouble ticket, fewer analyst time to where we got from detection to restore. The thing I want to really emphasize on is looking at tools for force multipliers for avoiding vulnerabilities, avoiding security incidents. So early threat knowledge to say, okay, threats just started up, looking for this exchange vulnerability. Let's go check. Hey, wait a minute, that patch came out 4 months ago. Let's go patch it real quick. Or more complicated scenarios where avoiding does mean, okay, we have to quickly go segment off these Siemens devices or these Philips devices or Schneider devices, because we do have those vulnerabilities and they ain't going to change soon. And let's do it before any attacks start pointing out the problems. So that's sort of, some of the areas of focus on. And again, there's more information in the paper. Take one last look on the list of questions here, and we'll get to a few before we have to close things out. Did we look at the number of SOC managers, CISOs that are providing the opportunity to play? I don't think, Barb, we had that in here in the SOC surveys. We had some, no, I'm sorry, we didn't. It was all from the qualitative responses. So the answer to that, unless you know differently, Barbara, is no, we don't have that data.
No, we didn't, unless there's something in some of the comments, but I don't think so. I think that would be a really good short poll, though.
Yeah, that's a good topic. We'll take that as a suggestion to do some sort of poll. Last question we'll do, and then we'll close things out. When choosing between learning a new skill and getting a new certificate, what should a person interested in making a career move into security choose? What would change if you already have a cert? I'll let you take a first shot at that, Barb.
Well, I take a look at how I got into this field to start with. I wasn't really doing security, but I was being tasked to do security. And I looked around and said, at that time, this is quite a few years ago, the GSEC seemed to be the best way to go because it gave me a learning experience. So I got my hands dirty doing stuff, learned the concepts, and was still able to play a little bit. But I think in terms of getting started, I don't know if you necessarily, it depends on your motivation and depends on how you learn. If going through a formal course is the best way to get started, then do it that way. If the best way is to kind of do it on your own, do it that way. There's a lot of resources out there to do that. And the same way, I think if you already have a certificate, see what you're interested in. You've probably already got your feet under you as far as the fundamentals go, and just start looking to see where in the field you're the most interested, because it's a very, very broad topic and a lot of places to go.
Yeah, I guess what I would say is someone who's sort of floated through security in strange ways. These days, I would definitely say learn that skill, learn how to use that tool, learn how to do something, and then you'll get a job at a company who'll then pay you to take SANS courses and get a certificate. I think that, you know, you look at software people, most software people are getting hired at the lower levels or right out of college, right out of high school. They have no certificates. They
Right.
actually know how to program and wrote web apps, and that's on their web resume, what they built, not some certificate stapled to it. So at that level, if you're at that level, have the skill first, learn how to do some stuff, play with the tools, participate in these bug bounty type programs you can be a security researcher for, and learn how to do stuff.
And I think also, if you're making the transition from IT, you've got a lot of opportunities also, not to go, you know, pull people from IT to security. But if you have an IT background and you want to flow over to security, there's plenty of places to get started.
One way not to impress the security side is to try to hack into the system from the IT side and then show the security side what you did. That will not get you a job in security.
That's
okay.
True.
We went through the Q&A, and I'm going to turn things over to Jessica for any final words now.
All right, thank you very much. So that's all the time that we do have for today. Thank you to both of our speakers, John and Barbara, for your great presentation, and to Awake, Anomaly, Cisco, Extra Hop, Logarithm, Reversing Labs, Samplify, Swimlane, and Threat Connect for sponsoring this webcast, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcast. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.